Let's go learn some Torah. Ready? The end of Chanukah and Parasha's Miqetz. Let's see what we can figure out. Although we did discuss certain things from Parasha's Vayetchev, I want to bring up something to you as well. I mentioned to you last week the concept in the Yeshiva Mir where the boys did not accompany the other boy home, did not walk him home, and the Mashgiach wanted to close the yeshiva. He felt that if boys lacked bein adam lechavero, they lacked relationship, they lacked derech eretz, that derech eretz called Torah. So you think about Yosef in jail. So what was it that led to Yosef getting out of jail? If you had to crystallize, you had to put it in one word or in one phrase. Yosef was in jail for 10 years. He asked the butler to remember him. It cost him another 2 years. We're going to talk about that tonight. But what was it? How did Yosef get out of jail? So it's very interesting. Let me tell you how he got out, and let me put it to you in a modern day perspective. It says that Vayihi achar devarim ha'elu was after all those years. Yosef was in jail, 10 years, that Paro got angry at two of his officers, the butler, the chief butler, and the baker. The butler, because a fly was found in the wine. The baker, because a stone was found in the bread. Okay. They're thrown in jail. Their entire life has been turned upside down. Anyway, they have a dream, and the morning comes. Vayovo aleim Yosef haboker. Yosef is walking by where they were in the morning. Vayarosam, and he sees them. Vihine zoafim, and they're sad. Okay, let's put into perspective. You're taking a train, a subway train to Manhattan. You get on the train here at Union Turnpike, let's say, in the F train or the E train, and there are people all around you. There's 200 people in that one car. And the person you see next to you looks sad. Okay? What does the average person do under those circumstances?
Are you okay?
They look the other way. They don't ask him. You don't know who you're going to meet on the subway. Nobody wants to talk on the subway. No one is interested in hearing what you have to say. You hold another pole. You find a different seat. You move to a different car. Vayishal es Paro. So Yosef asked the officers of Paro, Asher ito b'mishpar beis Adonov lemor, who was in the jail with him, Madua panecha roim hayom. Why are you upset today? And they said, because we had dreams, and the dreams were very disturbing. Yosef could have said, that's nice. Good luck with that, have a great day. But he doesn't. He says, well, tell me the dreams, and I'll see what I can do. Well, the butler right away tells him the dream, and everything's great. The baker tells him the dream, and it's not so good. How many times are you going to tell someone on the subway, oh, by the way, that's horrible. I got bad news for you. You're going to go to jail. I'm going to call 911 right now. He'll punch you in the nose. The very fact that Yosef took the time to talk to these people, to care about these people, and these are people who are not Jewish, they're strangers, total strangers to him. That's how he got out of jail. Because the butler remembered him after that. The butler remembered the guy cared. So, it was very interesting how Yosef got out of jail. Now, he brings down over here in the Ocha Palos on Torah something very interesting. I don't think we talked about it. He says that when Yosef got out of jail and Paro wanted to elevate him and put him in a very high position, the advisors, they weren't thrilled with that. This Joseph has spent 12 years in jail. Again, the president wants to appoint someone to a cabinet position. He has to get Congress's approval. Okay? The guy's been in jail for 12 years.
What kind of person?
Right? And what was it? Attempted rape of one of the high noble women of Egypt.
Vice President wife.
Right, the vice president's wife, a rape charge. What kind of a job is this guy going to get? He's not going to go for it. So they weren't thrilled with Paro's choice of decision of cabinet member, minister. So he brings down over here from the Tosos Hasholim, from the Medrash, that Yosef said to the people, it said to Paro in front of the people, I understand you have a painting in your bedroom. He says, yeah, I got a painting of a woman, a beautiful woman in my bedroom. Who was that woman? Sarah Imenu. So Yosef says, bring the painting out. And they brought the painting out, and the people looked at Yosef and looked at the picture of the painting, and they were almost the same. So they said, how is that possible? He said, well, that's my great-grandmother. Well, when Paro heard that the love of his life, so-called Sarah Imenu, the painting that he had in his bedroom for the last 100 years or 50 years, whatever it was Yosef's great-grandmother, well, it changed everybody's opinion, he says. Right away, everybody jumped on the bandwagon and said, this guy, he's a great guy. He's a wonderful person. So, I mean, that's very significant, very, very interesting. It's also interesting how things work out. That means Yosef was now the second most powerful person in Egypt. He could have married any girl. Not only any girl, he could have married 100 girls. He could have had 100 wives. He wasn't restricted. In the end, good evening, he married one person, Osnat. How did he find Osnat? Because the women threw their jewelry. And she threw this golden bar that had Yaakov Avinu's writing on it. And he found Osnat. So here's this Yosef saying when he got out of jail, that's great, I'm going to be in Egypt, it's going to be wonderful, my life is going to be different, but what kind of a social life am I going to have? Where am I going to find a wife in Egypt? I don't want to marry Egyptian women. And there he finds the daughter of Dinah from the house of Yaakov. Like, what are the chances? 0. Yet it was all planned out for him. His luck was beginning to change on every level. His financial picture changed. His spiritual picture changed. Now his social picture changed. And he only married the one wife. He didn't have any other women. Egypt was not known to be a very moral society. It was known to be a very immoral society. And Yosef stood out. That's why he was called Yosef HaTzadik, because he could control his temptation. So that's something that's very important to understand. I mentioned last time that the Hebrew word for Greek is Yavan, Yavan. Yud, Vav, Nun. Yud is a small line, Vav is a little bit longer, Nun is a little bit longer, how it gradually gets longer. If you read it backwards, it spells the word noi, Nun, Vav, Yud. Noi means beauty. The Greeks were big believers in beauty, the physical beauty, the Olympics. So it's interesting that the very name, Yavan, read backwards, means beauty. He brings down over here that when it says that Ephraim and Manasseh were born, it says Yulad. Yulad is in singular term. Ephraim and Manasseh were born, and then say Yoldu, plural. It says Yulad, singular. He says that they were twins. We all assume Manasseh is much older than Ephraim. Yeah, by about a minute. The same way Rachel and Leah were twins, and Yaakov and Esau were twins. So Ephraim and Manasseh were twins. That's very fascinating, because normally we didn't expect them to be twins. He brings down over here that, I'll tell you who he says it from. He says it from the Seder HaDoros, Hevi B'Shem Nesiv HaYoshor, the name of the Birkas Shmuel, Ki Ephraim and Manasseh Tumim Hoyu. I found also very interesting that the name Manasseh spells the name Mishnah, spells the name Neshama. The same letters, Manasseh, Mishnah, Neshama. It has a lot of interesting meanings. People who study names, it has a lot of interesting meanings. Ephraim stands for Afar, which means dust, twice. It's Yosef named Ephraim in memory of his grandfather and his great-grandfather, Avraham and Yitzchak, because they were both considered dust or ashes on the Mizbeach. So Ephraim, it was named after Avraham and Yitzchak, not after Yaakov, and Menashe was named after the ability to forget. A lot of Holocaust survivors named their children Menashe. Means the ability to forget what happened in the Holocaust. For Yosef to function in Egypt, he had to forget about his family, which he did for a while. He forgot about his family. So it was very, very interesting. It says in the book over here that when Yosef saw Binyamin the first time, he cried.
Ability to forget or do not forget?
To forget. You see, when you keep thinking about your home, you're homesick, you cry a lot and you're sad. If you're able to be busy and focus on the job at hand, which he was extremely busy, it gave him a chance to forget a little bit, and that was a bracha. That's what he says. Menashe, Hashem gave me the ability to forget. There are many people who survived the Holocaust who tell horrible, horrible stories, which under normal conditions would drive a person crazy. They would have nightmares upon nightmares, and for them to come to the United States, many of them did, and get married and have families and go to work and forget about the horrors of the Holocaust, it took a certain strength. My parents never spoke about the Holocaust. I never heard any stories. Towards the end, my father, I never heard. Towards the end of my mother's life, we began to hear some stories, but very few.
Most of them don't.
No stories.
In Borough Park,
That's right.
they don't
Nothing.
say.
They wanted to forget. They don't want to live through the horrors, the brutality of it. It was, you couldn't live with it, because if you thought about it day in and day out, you would go crazy.
And there
So-
was a lot of family.
Right. So it was a bracha to forget. It was a bracha to forget. That's what Yosef says. He brings down over here that when Yosef saw Binyamin the first time, he started crying. He brings down the reason why he started to cry was because Binyamin looked exactly like his mother. So when he saw Binyamin, it wasn't that his brother, it wasn't that he had 10 children and all 10 children, Yosef was never at their weddings or whatever it was, that he missed out such a big piece of the history of the family. That was true. But the reason he says he cried was because Binyamin looked like Rachel. And it just reminded him about Rachel. Which is interesting, how Yosef saw things. It says that when Ashes Potiphar tried to seduce him, what stopped him? He saw the image of his father. Now, okay, that's not a bad thought. But let's understand this. Okay? Again, I like to put things in perspective. Let's say you have a daughter, and the daughter's going out with a guy. And the guy tells you a story that there was one time, in a moment of weakness, he was on Manhattan, in some of the areas that people shouldn't really be in. And he was this close to getting involved with a prostitute, with a woman. But you know what stopped him? He thought about his father. He saw an image of his father. Okay. I would be more impressed if he saw an image of God. Or maybe his Rabbi. He saw his teacher, his principal, his Rabbi. He's thinking what his Rabbi would say. I'm not sure about his father. I don't know how to, and I'm not sure if I want a guy like that to marry my daughter. Because just because he got this close, but he didn't cross the line, well, that's scary, because the next time he might get this close and he might cross the line. I have cases like that every day. So, I'm not sure, I'm not sure what image he should have seen, but that's a different discussion, and maybe next year we'll talk about it. Okay. I spoke to you briefly about this. I want to talk about it because it's Hanukkah ended tonight. So I want to talk to you briefly about this, although I'm going to talk about it more next year as well. I think I mentioned to you, that there's something called Megillas Antiochus, or Megillat Chashmonaim. Have you ever heard of that? So that means there's a book called the Book of the Maccabees, the Book of Antiochus, or the Book of Matisyahu. We don't read it on Hanukkah. We read Megillat Esther, but we don't read Megillat Chashmonaim. And some Sidurim have it. The Art Scroll Siddur, some of the older Sidurim have it. And it seems, I think the Vilna Gaon said that there were communities that used to read it, but he put a stop to it. So the question is, why? Why don't we read the Book of the Maccabees? Okay? I'll extend the question a little bit. We spoke a few weeks ago, I said that the Gemara asks, Haman, where is there a remez to Haman in the Torah? Because it says, did you eat from the tree? Hamina ate. Hamin spells Haman. Esther, where is she found in the Torah? Oh, Esther, I'll hide my face. Mordechai, in the Ketoret, one of them is translated Mordechai. So we have sources in the Gemara. Where do we see the Torah give a reference to the Purim story? And we have 3 different places where Mordechai is mentioned, and Haman is mentioned, and Esther is mentioned. Okay. How come the Gemara doesn't say, where do we have Yehuda HaMaccabi in the Torah? Doesn't exist. Where do we have Matisyahu Kohen Gadol? Doesn't exist. Where do we have the Yavanim, Antiochus? Doesn't exist. That means Haman, we got to find a place that Haman is mentioned in the Torah. That's important for the Gemara to ask. But no questions about Hanukkah. None. It's an interesting dilemma. So the short answer that they give is, one answer that they give is, that the Gemara says, how come we don't say Hallel on Purim? On Purim we don't say Hallel. The Gemara answer is because Purim was a miracle that happened in Chutz La'aretz, not in Israel. We don't say Hallel on miracles that happen outside of Israel. So in place of the Hallel, we'll read the Megillat Esther. So Chanukah, we read Hallel. So given the choice between a Megillah or a Hallel, what is better? Hallel. So we say Hallel. So we don't need a Megillah. That's an answer. It's not a great answer because you could really do both, right? So it doesn't hurt to do both. The next answer is really the answer that they give. And the answer was as follows. The Gemara says in Tehillim, there's a whole, David Melech wrote a whole Tehillim on Esther. And he called Esther the Ayelet HaShachar, the morning star. And the Gemara says, why is she called the morning star? Because just like when the morning star comes up, it means the night is over. So too with Esther, Nevuah came to an end. After the story of Purim, and the second Beit HaMikdash was built by Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, there was no more Nevuah. Okay? So by the time Hanukkah came around, Nevuah had been over for hundreds of years. No prophecy, no Navi. There were no more Nevi'im. So therefore, the book of the Chashmonaim was a book. Very nice. Very nice book, but we don't read nice books in shul. We only read books from the Torah, from Tanakh. So therefore, we don't read it. I'll give you an example. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, he's a big gadol. He wrote a book on Chumash. Maybe we should read that in shul. Instead of taking out the Sefer Torah, maybe we should take out his book and read it in shul. We don't do that. Why not? He's a big gadol, yes. I'm sure his book has a lot of very important messages, of course. But we don't do that in shul. We only read from the Navi, Chumash and Navi. Esther was written by Nevi'im. The book of the Chashmonaim was not. So therefore, we don't read it. Simple answer. There's nothing against Hanukkah. Therefore, it's not mentioned in the Torah, because the story of Hanukkah happened afterwards. Next year, I'll give you a few more answers. But this is very fascinating. Rabbi Victor Miller brings this down. In the Christian Bible, there is a book called the Maccabees. Did you know that in the New Testament there's a book called the Maccabees? No.
Maccabees sounds familiar.
Yeah, in the New Testament. Now, why would the Christian Bible, the New Testament, have a book called the Maccabees? They care about Hanukkah? I don't see them lighting Hanukkah. Maybe Kwanzaa, but I don't see Hanukkah. I don't see that. So Rabbi Victor Miller says, you have to understand the thinking. According to the rabbis, Nevuah ended here. Hanukkah happened over here. For hundreds of years, there was no Nevuah. Comes the Christians, and their guy is going to start being a prophet. How could he be a prophet? There hasn't been prophecy for 400 years. So you know what they do? They say, oh yeah, we have the Maccabees story. Yeah, Hanukkah, Jews, prophecy. But there's no prophecy. In order to link their guy to the Purim story in history, what is the main event in between? Hanukkah. So they put the book of the Maccabees in. They say, hey, look, they spoke to God. Matisyahu must have spoken to God. Our guy spoke to God. But Rabbi Miller says, that's fake. There is no book of the Maccabees. Open up a Tanakh. There's 24 books. There's no book of the Maccabees because there was no Nevuah. And for hundreds of years, God didn't speak to people anymore. Prophecy ended. So what are the chances, after not speaking to anyone for 400 years, God spoke to this guy? 0. So that's why we don't have a book of the Maccabees. But the Christian Bible does.
What does the word Maccabees mean? Actually,
The Maccabee in Hebrew means a hammer. Because they beat the enemy. You know.
I don't know what they call the people Maccabees, so maybe
Right.
With the hammer.
With a hammer, I don't know what it was, but it's an interesting question why we have no mention of Megillat Antiochus. We don't read it in Shul. The answer is because there was no Nevuah. It's a book. It's a nice book. But there are many nice books. So let's read it. Read it all you want. But we don't read nice books in Shul. You know? If Rav Moshe Feinstein wrote a book, we don't read it in Shul. No, we don't take out the book instead of the Sefer Torah and read Rav Moshe Feinstein's book. I'm sure it's a very good book. Read it at home. That's what the Maccabees are. So that's something that's very, very interesting. Okay. Let's go a little bit further. Let's understand a little bit more. Vahi Miqetz Shenasayim Yomim. It was at the end of 2 years. Yosef was in jail an extra 2 years. Ufaro Cholem V'inei Omed Al Yor. Pharaoh has a dream. So now, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. You know what he says? He says, Ufaro Cholem. And Paro was dreaming. So he says, every night for those 2 years, Paro had the same dream. It's a famous Or HaChaim HaKadosh. That Yosef should have come out of jail after 10 years. He stayed an extra 2 years because he put his faith in the butler. Every night, Paro had the same dream. And it was a scary dream. And every morning he got up, he forgot the dream, and he went on his day. So Yosef could have come out of jail any time in those 2 years. But this night, after 2 years, Paro had the dream. He got up in the morning, and he remembered the dream. He goes a little bit further, we're going to see in a moment. Now, let's figure this out over here. Let's figure this out. The Chartumim, Paro's advisors, he had an inner council of advisors. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being not too smart, 1 being not too smart, 10 being very smart. Where would you put the Chartumim of Egypt? On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put them? 10. No question, 10. They were very, very smart. They knew nature, they knew the signs, they could read the planets, they knew how to read the moon, the sun, the stars. They were brilliant. Paro was a powerful king, and he had the best advisors money could buy. Okay? No question about it. So, what happens? Paro asks them, tells them the dream, and they come back with a bunch of answers. 7 daughters you'll have, 7 daughters will get married, 7 daughters you'll bury, 7 countries you'll conquer, 7 countries will rebel. They're giving him 100 different answers. None of them Paro accepts. None of them. Okay? And one of the reasons that they give is, according to some opinions, when Paro had his dream, he also dreamt the answer. He just couldn't remember. So sometimes when you hear the right answer, it clicks.
Yeah.
So since he didn't hear the right answer, it didn't click. He brings down in the Ocha Palos HaTorah from the Sefer Poneach Rosa that Paro got so scared in his dream that his joints went out. He sprained his hand, his leg, his joints popped. And he was in agony. And when they told him the interpretation, he was still in agony. When Yosef told him his interpretation, he relaxed and his joint popped in. And now he felt good. So he knew that was the truth. So he says that he had a physical joint pains, and it was only after the interpretation of Yosef that he felt better. But this is the problem that the Meforshim have. The Gemara in Bracha says that a dream goes after what? The interpretation. That means if you have a dream, how, and you come and tell it to me, how I explain it, that's how it's going to happen. The Gemara brings down an example. Abaye and Rava had the exact same dream. Abaye paid the guy a few $100s. So he said to Abaye, you'll be successful, you'll be popular, you'll be rich. And that's exactly what happened. Rava went to the guy with the exact same dream, but says, I have no money to pay you. He says, you're going to be poor, you're going to be unsuccessful, you're going to be sad, and that's exactly what happened. From here you learn, you pay up front. Rabbis learned that lesson a long time ago. But you see, but listen to what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying Abaye and Rava had the exact same dream. So how could the same dream have totally opposite application? Because the guy said to you one thing and to Rava a different thing. So if the Khartoumim of Egypt said to Paro, you're going to conquer everything, let's say they're wrong. It was not the right interpretation. But if that's what they said, if it comes out of their mouth, it should have happened. Why didn't it happen? That's a question they ask.
He didn't accept it. Paro
So
didn't accept
let's see what that's good. That's an answer. That could be one of the answers. But let's see what the answer is. So one answer I saw is that we see when Paro told the dream to Yosef, he made changes. He mixed up the dream. And the Gemara says that Yosef said to Paro, no, that's not what you saw. It really happened this way. And Paro says, oh, now I see how smart you are. That means Paro did it on purpose. He switched the facts. The Khartoumim didn't grab it. Yosef did. So he called Yosef the Tzofnas Paneach, the man who could know things that are hidden, because he knew how to correct the dream. Fascinating. So the answer that they give is that since Paro told the Khartoumim, the ministers, the advisors, the wrong dream, so even though they interpreted it, it was the wrong dream. So therefore it didn't apply. Okay? Part of what you said, Paro didn't accept what they said, that also is true. Abaye and Rava got the interpretation and says, great. But Paro said, no way, he rejected it, so it probably didn't take hold. But the other answer is, the facts were wrong. Now, there was someone else who had dreams, Nebuchadnezzar. In the book of Daniel, he had a dream, a scary dream. He called together all his advisors. And he said to them, I had a scary, scary dream, and I want you to tell me what it means. So what does the advisor say to him? No problem. Tell us your dream, and we'll tell you what it means. What did Nebuchadnezzar say to them? He says, no, anybody can do that. Why am I paying you the big bucks? I'm paying you so you should tell me my dream. If you can tell me my dream, that means you really know your stuff. Then I'll listen to what you have to say. To which they said to Nebuchadnezzar, but that's impossible. How can we tell you your dream? So he says, oh, did I forget the incentive? If you don't do it, I'm going to kill you. So now you got a choice. Guess my dream, or I'm going to kill you. And he started killing one after the other after the other. He had killed a few hundred by the time Daniel came and told him exactly what was going on. And Daniel jumped the gun. He wanted to stop the killing. So he told Nebuchadnezzar the dream. The truth is, had Daniel waited, he would have gotten rid of all the opposition. Because a lot of the advisors who he saved later came back to hate him, and Daniel got framed on a few occasions. And that's why he ended up in the lion's den, and that's why Hanan and Mishael Barzaya ended up eventually in a fiery furnace. You know, they had framed Daniel, his advisors. So they weren't very friendly to Daniel. But that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. Interesting play of game, right? You call in your advisor and you say, I had a horrible dream, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. If you really know, if you speak to God, you should be able to tell me the dream and then tell me what it is. Paro didn't go that far. Paro told him the dream. It's interesting, I saw somewhere that the gematria, the numerical value of the word Yosef is 156. The numerical value of the word Nilus, Nile, is 156. That's why Yosef was connected to the Nile and gave brachos to the Nile. The Nile was successful. That's why eventually they buried Yosef in the Nile. They put his body in the Nile to bless the Nile because he had the same value. Okay, Rabbeinu Bachai. Rabbeinu Bachai says, okay, I hear everything we just said, the whole discussion, I hear it, he says. I'm bothered by this. You're one of the advisors of Egypt. You're one of the Khartoumim. On a scale of 1 to 10, you're smart like a 10. You hear a dream that involves wheat and cows. Now, what do you think that is going to mean? It has to mean something with the economy, right? If I told you a dream that involves oil and futures and the stock market and gold, would you tell me, oh, the United States is going to have, the president's going to have 7 daughters and going to bury 7 daughters?
No.
I mean, come on. Let's get real.
Economy.
It's going to be the economy, you know? It's not going to be anything but the economy. If I'm dreaming about gold and stock futures and oil and wheat and corn, it's got to be the economy. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. So Rabbeinu Bachai gives an interesting answer. There's a Gemara. The Gemara talks about this during the days of the Churban Beit HaMikdash, when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. He said, how could the Chachamim make so many mistakes? They did. They made a lot of mistakes. So he says that sometimes Meshiv Chachamim Ochor, Hashem makes the Chachamim dumb. It's called dumbing up a person. Hashem made the Khartoumim dumb. That for those 5 minutes, they were stupid. He took them from a 10 and brought them down to a 1 because he wanted Yosef to come out of jail. So you're right. Under normal conditions, the Khartoumim would have right away figured it all out. We just said they would have figured it all out. They would have gotten at least in the ballpark. They were so far off base because Hashem wanted it that way. He dumbed them up. That's one answer that they give. Another answer is from Rabbi Yeshua Leib Diskin, the Maharil Diskin. He says something very interesting. He says they can only see what will happen in the future. They should have seen that Egypt will be subject to a famine. You know why they couldn't see it? Because there never really was a famine in Egypt. Yosef stopped it from happening. And when Yaakov came down, it stopped completely. So they could only see what would really happen. But what really could happen never really happened, therefore they couldn't see it. You understand the logic? They could only see the future. But the truth is, Egypt would never suffer from the famine because Yosef was going to save them. So they couldn't see that future. Yosef could see the future with his help and without his help. So he could see the whole picture. That means they could only see this picture. Yosef could see the full picture. So that's why they didn't come up with it. So I found that to be very, very fascinating. And of course, Yosef did, come up and make suggestions, which was very interesting because how did he make suggestions to Paro? Well, Paro, you got to hire a guy. You got to create a new position, new cabinet position, the minister over the food. Thank you very much, sir, but who asked you for your advice? The answer is that Yosef was saying that that's part of the dream. Part of the dream was the solution. The dream, the interpretation, and how to fix the problem was all part of the dream. And Paro remembered that. And therefore Paro put it all together. Okay. Machlokas Bavli and Yerushalmi. Bavli, we know you have back there Bavli. Do you have a Yerushalmi in the place?
Yeah, there's a few.
A few. I've been now going through Yerushalmi, as you know. I talked to you about how I'm finishing off Zroim. I'm almost at the very end. Let me bring you an interesting machloket, or a difference of approach between Bavli and Yerushalmi. The Gemara Bavli asks a question. And the question is, how do we know that a minyan is 10 people? Have you ever asked yourself the question, where do we get that a minyan is 10 people?
Can we get it from Avraham Avinu? From the son of Amorah?
Well, that's interesting.
When he was davening.
He was davening that if you had so many tzaddikim...
He went up to the 10.
He went up to 10 and he stopped. That's interesting. We don't learn it out from there.
But could be the possibility.
It's a possibility. That's not what the Gemara answers. The Bavli says that there's a pasuk, V'nikdashti, I will become holy, betoch b'nei Israel. The word betoch means inside. So how many people do you need to do Kedusha? You need a minyan. So he says there's a pasuk, separate mitoch, the same word, ha'eda haro hazeh, by the Meraglim. How many bad spies were there? 10. So we see toch, the same word in both lines, that in order to say Kedusha, you need Eda. Eda is 10 from the Meraglim. So the Bavli says, we learned the concept of a minion from the Meraglim. Now, you and I can think of...
I didn't get how. I'm sorry. How
Okay.
it's 10?
There's a way to learn out, if two psukim use the same word, you can connect the two. This says, V'nikdashti, you make holy, Kedusha, betoch, amongst Bnei Israel. And this says, separate mitoch, from amongst this bad crowd. How many were in the bad crowd? 10. So you see that a crowd is called 10. And here it says, you only can do Kedusha in a crowd. Crowd, inside. How much is a minion? 10.
My crowd is 10. Count crowd.
Because there were 10 spies that were bad. Of the 12 spies, there were 10. Okay? Not a great place to learn out minyan from, the Meraglim, right?
Right, it's a little confusing.
Little confusing. Okay. The Yerushalmi says, no, there's a different place. V'nikdashti, you should sanctify me betoch b'nei Yisrael. Where do we have the word betoch someplace else? In Parshas Miqetz. It says, Vayovo b'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel came, lishbor, to buy bread, betoch habaim, amongst the other people who were coming to buy bread.
10.
How many boys came down from Yaakov sent to come down?
10.
10! So we see a minion is 10.
Wow.
So the Yerushalmi says that since we have the same word, toch, by the Bnei Yisrael, who were all big tzaddikim, and there were 10 of them, boom, a minion is 10.
Wow.
Now, I'll show you something from the Chidah. The Chidah says something fascinating. He says, if you go to an Ashkenazi shul, and they want to count that they have 10 men, they don't count 1, 2, 3, 4. What do? Hoshia et Amecha.
Or not one, not two.
Or, right, well, let's say Hoshia et Amecha. That's what the Chidah writes. Amongst Sfardim, he says, we don't do that. How do we count 10? How do Sfardim count to get to 10? Do you know?
Aleph, Bet, Gimel.
No.
By head.
No. When I tell you this, it will blow your mind. You ready? You want to hold on to your seats? The Chidah says, we do it, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Yeah, I know.
10 words. Why hamotzi lechem min haaretz? Because what do they come to buy?
Lechem.
Lechem, wheat. And we learn out minyan from the boys of Bnei Yaakov coming to Mitzrayim.
What Parasha? Yes, I mean last
Miqetz, this week.
this week coming.
This week, they just came.
Oh, the Saturday.
The Saturday.
Yeah.
So he says, since we learn our minyan from them buying bread, and the bracha hamotzi lechem in haaretz has 10 words, that's how we count.
Wow.
That's pretty shocking, right?
Yeah.
Then he says that there's Shmona Esrei, there's 19 brachot, 19 times 3, because Shachrit Mincha Maariv is 57. The word zan, to eat, food, zayin nun is 57. So he says the 3 minyans that you go, and the 3 Shmona Esreis that you daven, is a skula to have mazon, to have food. How do we know that from? Because minyan means to have, comes from Yaakov's children buying bread. So, what's the question that comes up, of course, is why then does the Bavli learn out minyan from the Meraglim, the spies, who are not good guys, when they could have learned it out, like the Yerushalmi, from the children of Yaakov? So you know what the answer is? I don't know if the Chidah is the one who gives this answer, but listen to the answer. When you daven in a minyan, what are we afraid of? You're going to look around, and you're going to say, why am I here? That guy, he's not even from. And that guy, he's not a good guy. And that guy's a thief. And that guy speaks Lashon Hara. This is a horrible minyan. But according to halacha, if you have 10 people, do you care who's religious, who's not, or who speaks Lashon or no? Why? Because once you're 10, you're 10. How do you know you can daven with a group of people where half of them are no good? From the Meraglim. The Bavli says, you know where we learn minyan out from? Not from the good guys, from the spies. How many of the 10 were good? None of them. And yet they're a minyan. They could daven mincha, and you could daven with them. So he says, we learn from the Bavli that when you daven in a minyan, don't look around so much. Look in your siddur. Don't care what everybody else is doing. And that's why they learned it from there. Now it's interesting. The famous word, they say that the word tzibur stands for tzadi, stands for tzadikim, and the bay stands for beinonim, people in the middle, and the resh stands for rishaim. A tzibur is a combination of tzadikim, average people, rishaim. You don't look. They're a tzibur. They're a group. Once you're a group, you're a group. You don't care anymore who, what, where, and how.
Tzibur means group.
Tzibur means a congregation, a group. Right. Tfilah b'tzibur means you should daven in a group. How much is a group? 10. So where do we learn that from? So the nice way to learn it out from is from the Yerushalmi. But the practical way is the Bavli, which is what I've been finding out, that the Bavli tends to be much more practical, and the Yerushalmi has some nice stuff to it. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan Zweig, who's a Rosh Hashiva in Miami, he brings down the discussion. It says that Yosef had the children before the famine began. So the Gemara says, why? That when the whole world is in pain, you shouldn't be having children. Because if the world is in pain, you should be in pain also. Okay, sounds great, except we know that Yocheved, who was the daughter of Levi, was born right when Yaakov came down to Mitzrayim, which was 2 years into the famine. How come he had a child? You're not supposed to have children during a famine. So one answer that is given is that Levi only had sons, so he needed a daughter to be Mekayem Peru Uvu. Problem with that is Yosef also only had sons, so he needed a girl also. So they give a different answer. The Mizrahi gives a different answer, which is a common sense answer. The only person who has to be in pain is the person who's not suffering at the moment. The whole world is starving, and you have plenty of food. So you have to create your own pain, don't have children. Levi was starving like the rest of the world. So therefore he could have children. There was no restriction on him. So it's only the people who have food that had to be restricted. By Levi, he didn't have to do that. Okay, the truth is that they say Yaakov had plenty of food. You know, he just didn't want to show everybody that he had food. But that's a different discussion. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says Yosef lived to be 110. He should have lived to be 120. Why did he lose 10 years of his life? Because he heard 10 times the brothers say, "Our father, your servant," which was disrespectful. And since honoring one's parents means you live longer, if you listen to the disrespect of your parents, logic says you will live shorter. Okay. The Vilna Gaon says, but he only heard it 5 times, not 10 times. So he says 5 times the brother said it in Hebrew. But Yosef pretended he didn't understand Hebrew. So Menashe said it over to him in Egyptian. Then the Rabbi Yitzchok Sorotzkin says, but listen, Yosef was playing out a game here. What was he supposed to say? That he understood the Hebrew? He had to play out the game. So he says, yes, I understand that for the 5 times in Hebrew, but when Menashe was translating into Egyptian, he could have said to him, don't talk that way. You know, their father is an older person. We have to show the old man respect. So just say our father, don't say your servant. He could have said that to Menashe in Egyptian, because they didn't understand Egyptian, the brothers, for what we know. But he didn't do that. So he said nothing. So by saying nothing, not correcting the mistake, it sometimes makes you responsible for the whole mistake. So he says that it's unfortunate, but that's what it is. He talks about over here, very interesting. He says how we see from Yosef how the fate of a person changes overnight. He brings down a story from Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz was Shiva of Mir. And in Yerushalayim, when they collect garbage, there is one guy on the bottom, and he throws the garbage can to the guy on top, and the guy on top throws it into the garbage. I guess they don't have it over here by the side.
Okay.
Right, so, and the guy on top is the better job, because the guy on the bottom has to walk, and he has to lift, he has to pick it up, he has to hand it up, he has to hand it down. And the guy on top just throws it in and puts it down. So one time Reb Chaim Shmulevitz was walking, and he recognized one of the garbage people he used to learn in the Mir Yeshiva. And so the garbage guy comes over to Reb Chaim Shmulevitz and says, don't be embarrassed for me. In about 5 minutes we're going to switch, I'm going to be on top. So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says, yeah, that's life. In life, 1 minute you're on the bottom, the next minute you're on top, and 5 minutes later you're back on the bottom. Rabbi, what's his name? Rabbi Usher Mayer Weiss, I think, or Rabbi Weiss from Staten Island. I forgot his first name. I know it's May or something, but Usher Mayer May, I'm not sure. He talks about the dreidel. So he brings down a story. He says the story is not true, but he first says it as if it is true, although it really is not true. He says that Mattel wanted to make this real fancy dreidel with lights and bells and sounds, and asked him to write up the rules of the dreidel. So he wrote a whole thing that the rules of the dreidel are very simple. You spin the dreidel. If you get a gimel, you get all the money in the pot. If you get a hey, you get half the money. If you get a nun, you get no money. And if you get a shin, you got to put in $2 or whatever it is. And those are the rules. Gets a phone call from Mattel, and he says, we ran this by our board, and they're claiming that your dreidel rules make no sense. He says, it's not a very complicated game. It's been this way for hundreds of years. What doesn't make sense out of it? He says, I'm going to, maybe his name is Moshe Meir Weiss, I'm going to get one of our think tank guys to call you. So this guy who's Jewish calls him up, and he says, well, Rabbi, the rules don't make sense. He says, well, why not? He says, well, let's talk about it. What is the letters on the dreidel stand for? Nes, Gadol, Haya, Sham. A great miracle happened there. So what's the most important part of Hanukkah? The miracle, right? Yes. Yeah. Well, if the miracle is the most important part, if you get the nun, you should get everything in the pot. Then the second most important part is where it took place, in Jerusalem. That's Sham, there. So if you get the shin, at least get half. Then if you get a gimel or a hey, you get nothing and put it in. You have the letters all backwards, he says. You get a gimel, you get everything, and the nun, nothing, should be just the opposite. So your game doesn't make any sense. So he said back as follows. He said that in Judaism, everything starts from the beginning. The very first letter of the Aleph Beis is an Aleph. The Ten Commandments began with that letter. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. The letter Aleph is a Vav, which is 6, with a Yud, and a Yud is 20. Is 26, is Hashem's name. So the closer you are to the Aleph, the more special you are. So the Gimel, which is close to the Aleph, gets all. The Hey gets half. The Nun, which is all the way down here, gets nothing. And the Shin, which is at the end, has to pay for his troubles. Oh, Rabbi, now it makes a lot more sense. So he says, again, the dreidel game is just a game. The whole purpose of the dreidel game was when they were learning Torah and the inspector came, they could pull out the dreidels and play. But the key was not the dreidel, was the learning Torah. He says, we spend more time playing dreidel. On Chanukah, you should spend more time learning Torah. He says, let's just remember what the purpose is. But he says there's an important lesson to learn about the dreidel. Should I tell you what it is? You spin it. Life is about a spin. When the dreidel is spinning, you have no way of knowing if you're going to win or lose. So in life, as you spin and you go through life, on any given day, you really don't know what's going to happen to you that day. You don't know if you're going to win or lose. You know when you find out what's going to happen to you? When it falls down. So when it falls down, sometimes you can fall lucky or you can fall bad. He says, you know what the real secret of the game is? After it falls down, what do you do next? You pick it up and you spin it again. He says the key to the dreidel game is knowing that life is a spin. It's a toss-up. You don't know what's going to be.
You fall down and get up.
And when you fall down, the game's not over.
You start it again.
You just pick it up and you spin it again. That's how a Jew. That's the dreidel game.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you know that's the dreidel game. So there's lessons to be learned about the dreidel. Even though it seems like a child's game, he says, you know, the Chachamim spend time about this dreidel game. There's got to be a little bit about it that's a lot more than what's there. Okay. I want to share with you one more thing over here. It's already 9:24. You see how time, 9:26, how time flies when you're having fun. Yeah. Why do we eat latkes on Hanukkah? Seems like a very simple question. What would be the answer? Let's ask this intelligent young man who's a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10.
You like it?
Tell me why we have latkes on Hanukkah.
Remember the oil?
Because it's fried in oil. So someone wrote an article for one of the magazines, I'm not sure which one, that we eat latkes because it's fried in oil. Reb David Feinstein wrote back saying, that's not why we eat latkes. He says in Europe, they didn't have oil. You know what we had in Europe? We had schmaltz. Schmaltz means chicken fat. We used to fry everything in fat.
Duck or geese.
Duck or geese, fat. But most of the time we fried it in butter because we had plenty of butter. And he says that in his house by Reb Moshe Feinstein, whenever his mom was cooking or making latkes, they knew they were having milchiks for supper because it was always fried in butter. And he says the reason is because on Hanukkah it's a mitzvah to eat milchiks. Because the king took the Yehudis and she gave him cheese to eat, and it was salty cheese, and she gave him wine, and then he got drunk and he went to sleep, and she cut off his head and she killed him, whatever it was. So he says the reason we eat latkes has nothing to do with oil. It's because it's fried in butter, and because there's a mitzvah on Hanukkah to eat milchiks. Oil, he says, only came in America, because in America women cook with oil. So it had nothing to do. For thousands of years, they never had oil like that to cook. Oil was very expensive.
But when was the potato latkes? The potatoes started like maybe 300 or 400 years ago.
He says in his days, when they ate latkes, they ate it with sour cream because it was milchiks. He says today, because people eat it with fleischiks, they took out the sour cream and they put applesauce.
Applesauce, yeah.
People eat latkes with applesauce. He says, who heard of latkes with applesauce?
You could eat it both.
You could do both. He says, but that's not where it came from. It came from Europe, and in Europe they cooked latkes with butter, and it was to eat milchiks. And milchiks, because on Hanukkah there's a mitzvah to eat milchiks, the same way he says on Shavuos there's a mitzvah to eat milchiks.
Yeah.
So he says it has nothing to do with the oil.
What about the sufganiyot?
So he says that's interesting. He says the sufganiyot were probably a more recent occasion. You know, that's more from Israel. Not sure where the
Rambam brings this as minha kadmon.
Sufganiyot? With oil or with butter?
Well, he says the sufganiyot. That's what he says.
Right. So, but it doesn't say how it was fried.
He says minha kadmon, and we shouldn't lakil on that.
Okay, so maybe the Rambam was talking about with oil, but most of the Ashkenazim was nothing to do with oil.
He says you should eat halav and sufganiyot. It's minha kadmon.
Okay, so if it was chalav with sufganiyot, there's a good way of suspicion that the sufganiyot were made with butter also.
Butter, right.
So again, it goes to chalav. Nothing to do with...
Maybe it's not the part, maybe it's dairy also, I mean that's donuts itself.
You know, interesting that the dreidel in Hebrew is sivivon. Sivivon has the word yavan inside, you know. So like it's turning, you know, making circles around Yavan. Saviv Yavan, making circles around Yavan. Because that's what the dreidel game was. It was driving the Yavanim crazy. You know, they were making all these raids on these cheders, on these schools, and when they came rushing in, they were playing dreidel. They were playing games, you know. And today, most schools, they're still playing games. But we won't talk about that. Have a good night, everybody. To
Thank
be
you.
continued.
Thank you.